Okay, functions and data analysis fans, our topic for today, notes 1-6, percent. And so the goals are to, number one, change percents to fractions and decimals, and also the other way, vice versa. And number two is to solve percent problems, including applications. Before we start, let me tell you your joke of the day. What do you call birds that stick together? And the answer is Velcros. Okay, so here we go. Our first section here, percent and conversions. The word percent is actually broken into two parts. It's per cent, so per 100. Cent is for 100. So when we use the word percent, what we're really talking about is a ratio that compares a number to 100. So 75% is 75 per 100. So you can write it as a fraction, and that's also the same thing as a decimal is 0.75. But the idea percent literally means for every 100. 75 for every 100. Okay, so a percentage can be a ratio, which is also a fraction, and we can also convert that to a decimal. So percentages can be represented in a lot of different ways. So directions, change each percent to a decimal. So there are a couple that I've already done for you. 10% means 10 over 100 as a fraction. As a decimal, that's going to be 0.1 or 0.10. We don't put the extra zero on there, we just say 0.1. 25% is 25 over 100, which is 0.25. 78% is, as a fraction, 78 over 100, and that would be 0.78. When you divide by 100, basically what we're doing is we're taking the decimal point and shifting 2 places to the left. 78% becomes 0.78. 25%, shift the decimal here, and now it's 0.25. 10% is 0.10, or just 0.1. Now if it's 6%, 6 over 100, if I shift 2 places, notice there's an extra place right here. Well, that's where I would put a 0, so that would be 0.06. 6% is 0.06. 1 over 100 is 1%. As a decimal, that's 0.01. 100% is 100 over 100 equals 1. It's the whole thing. 20% is 20 over 100, and if I shift that decimal 2 places to the left, 0.20 or 0.2. 15%, 15 over 100, shift the decimal 2 places, and we have 0.15. Now I'm putting the 0 in front, but you don't have to. It's 0.15. 150%, now notice that's more than 100. It's 150 over 100. So when I shift the decimal 2 places, I get 1.5. If you have any questions, you can always take a calculator. If I go back to 15%, 15 divided by 100, my decimal is 0.15. But 150% is more than that. It's 1.5. Okay, 4.5%. All right, now I'm going to shift the decimal 2 places here. It's 4.5 over 100, which is 0.045, and then I'll put a 0 in front. So there's an extra space there for the 0, the 0.045, and then I just put that 0 in front. 8% is 8 over 100. Shift the decimal 2 places, and that's 0.08, or 0.08. And then 45% is 45 over 100. Percent means over 100. And shift the decimal 2 places, and we have 0.45, or 0.45. Okay? So you can convert percentages to decimals, just shift the decimal 2 spaces. Now in number 13, change the following decimals to percents. So let's work backwards. 0.25 as a fraction would be 25 over 100, which is 25%. 0.1, that's the same thing as 0.10. So that's 10 over 100, which is 10%. 0.07 is 7/100ths. When I'm reading this, this is 25 hundredths. This is 10 hundredths, 7 hundredths, and that's 7%. Now 0.025, this is now in terms of thousandths. Okay, so this would be, it would be 25 over 1,000, but let me keep it as a decimal here. Let me shift the decimal 2 spots to the right. It's 2.5 over 100, which is 2.5%. 1.42 is 142 over 100, which would be 142%. 0.93 is 93 over 100, which is 93%. Okay, so that's the front right there. Let me flip it onto the back. So now let's change the following fractions to percents. So we're going to take each fraction now and let's convert that to a percent. Now one thing you can always do, if I take 1/5, I can convert that to a decimal first. 1 divided by 5 is 0.2. Okay, or I'm going to write it as 0.20. Excuse me. So that's 0.20, which is 20%. Okay, that's 20 over 100. 3/4 is the decimal 0.75, which is 75%. 2 divided by 10 is 0.20, or 0.2, which is 20 over 100, which again is 20%. 1/8 is 0.125. Okay, so 0.125, I'm going to shift the decimal there, and it would be 12.5%. Okay, I'll circle all of these. 8 over 25 is 0.32, or 0.32, and that's 32 over 100, which is 32%. So to go, once I get the decimal, what I'm doing is I'm shifting it 2 places to the right for my percentage. When I go the other way, when I go from the percent, I shift 2 places to the left for the decimal. The last one here, this is 0.18, 9 over 50, shift 2 places to the right, and that's 18%. What we want to be able to do is to work back and forth in using decimals and percents. We don't do the fractions as much. Mostly it's converting decimal to percent or percent to decimal. All right, the second section here, percent problems. When you take a percent of a number, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the percentage as a decimal times the number, and what that gives us is what we call is the same thing as equals. So what number is 20% of 50? 20% of 50, we're going to take 20%, which would be 0.2 or 0.20 times 50. So of the number of 50, 50 is the number I'm multiplying by the percentage. And what that gives me is the is part, which is x. So 20% of 50 is 0.20 times 50, and if we multiply that, we get 10. So that is our answer. 10 is equal to x. So the number 10 is 20% of 50. All right, 26. 20 is 50% of what number? So 50% of what number? 50% is 0.5 or 0.50. Now, the variable is for 50% of what? So I'm going to say 0.5 times x equals 20, is 20. Now this is 0.5 times x, so to undo multiplication, we're going to divide by 0.5. And what we get is x equals. Now you got to be careful here. 20 divided by 0.5 is going to be 40. 20 divided by 0.5 is 40. So x is 40. A lot of times people will think it's half. They'll think the answer is 10. Okay, so when you take a percentage of a number, all we're going to do is multiply. Okay, I'm going to give a couple more examples just up here before we continue the rest of it. If I want to take 25% of 80, I would do 0.25 times 80, and my answer would be 20. If I want to take 15% of 120, I'm going to take 0.15 of, so times 120. I'll use the calculator on this one. 0.15 times 120, and we get 18. So 15% of 120 is 18. What if we try to do, let's say, 140% of 65? 140% of 65. Now, 140% is over 100%. 100% would just be 65. So we should be getting a number that's bigger than 65. So I'm going to take the decimal, 1.4. I'm going to shift 2 places. That's 1.4 times 65. Now we may get some decimals out of this. In this case, I think we get a nice integer, 91. So 140% of 65 is 91. Now we're going to stop part 1 of the video. So go ahead and pause it here and move on to part 2, and we will finish this up.